Good morning. Welcome to this mini seminar on a brand that walks the talk, the key to optimizing the candidate experience. You know, no matter how effective we are at writing good job postings, no matter whether we're a black belt in Boolean search techniques or a sourcing expert using some other kind of methodology, if we don't get the candidate experience right, more often than not, we're not going to be able to recruit top talent. So let's talk about first, what is the candidate experience? Is it what happens between recruiters and candidates? Is it what happens between a hiring manager and a candidate? Is it when other representatives of your organization interact with people, your receptionist, for example, when they come in for an interview? Is it what happens on your organization's corporate career site where you interact with candidates online? Or is it what happens on your Facebook page or on your Twitter page or in your LinkedIn account? Well, obviously the truth is that every one of those aspects represents a critical part of the candidate experience. Now, why is it important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. First, the best talent is almost always employed. So what does that mean? That means that in order to recruit them, we have to convince them to do the one thing we humans most hate to do: change. We have to convince them to go from the devil they know, their current boss, their current employer, their current commute, to a new organization, a new boss, a new commute. Second, the research shows that the best talent are interested in the requirements and responsibilities of an opportunity, but what's most important to them, what triggers their desire to move from one organization to another, is what it's like to work in an organization, its culture, its values, the coworkers who would be their peers. That's what they want to know about. And finally, the best talent are good consumers. Now, we all like to think of ourselves as good consumers, right? So how do we act? Well, when some vendor makes a claim, what do? We always do some research. We always test the vendor's claim to make sure that it's true. We look for evidence. If we're going to buy a car, for example, we test drive the car. Well, the challenge for the best talent is that they don't want to make changes. They want to work for great employers. And because they can't test drive your organization as a potential employer, they look for a surrogate. And that surrogate is your recruiting process. In other words, they believe that what happens to them as candidates is a good reflection of what will happen to them as employees. And that's why the candidate experience in your recruiting process is so important. Now, the key, of course, to attracting and recruiting the greatest number of A and B level performers is to optimize the candidate experience. So what is an optimum experience for your prospects? It is an expectation that comes true. An expectation that comes true. Your employment brand creates an expectation among the best talent about what it will be like to work in your organization. Then they're going to test that expectation that you've created with your brand by what happens in your recruiting process. If what happens in your recruiting process reflects, reinforces, symbolizes, represents what you've said about your organization in its brand, that expectation will come true. And you will be able to multiply your appeal to these people who do not want to make changes. So the optimal candidate experience is an expectation that comes true. How do we create it? Well, there are 16 different touch points in your recruiting process. They all begin with that employment brand statement. What does your organization stand for as an employer? What is your culture? What are your values? What kind of work environment do you offer the best talent? Then at those 16 different touch points, you want to make sure that that expectation comes true, that what you have defined as your brand is aligned with what actually happens in the recruiting process. Now, we all know these 16 touch points, but let me talk about two that are particularly important. The first is touch point number 10, interviews. There is a University of Michigan study out which shows that hiring managers are only 4% better than flipping a coin when it comes to picking the best candidate in an interview. They typically select the person who interviews best, or the person that they relate to the best, not necessarily the person who can perform the best. So that kind of experience flies in the face of a brand statement which says your organization values, respects, and supports the best talent. If the best talent isn't selected in an interview, the brand statement is not aligned with the reality of what happens in the recruiting process. A second touch point where things often go awry is touch point number 16, the last touch point. I call it reinforcement. Think about this. I once wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal talking about getting past yes. Because what I was hearing from recruiters out there is that you worked on this prospect, you worked on her and you worked on her and you worked on her and you finally got her to say yes. But what happened next? Because she was a member of the best talent, she was employed, which meant that she had to give notice. And in the 2 weeks or 4 weeks intervening period, she had buyer's remorse, she was hired away by another recruiter, or she got a counteroffer from her employer. And I was hearing as many as 40% of the people who said yes never showed up on the first day of work. Why is that? Because we have designed our recruiting processes not for the best talent, but for talent that is desperate, right? These are people who have no options. They aren't employed. So the process ends when they say yes. But think about how easy it would be if the minute that person said yes, we gave her her ID and password to her own homepage on your corporate career site. And when she got back home and she was sitting there with her spouse or significant other and a glass of wine, and she logged into that homepage on your organization's website, there was a personalized message from the CEO of your company saying, "Welcome to our team." And for the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks, that person got a constant stream of messages re-recruiting her, making sure that when the first day of work occurred, she was there to actually show up and become a member of your team. So all of these touch points are important, and they all need to reflect, underscore, represent what you have claimed about your organization as an employer in your e-brand statement. Your brand has to walk the talk. How is that alignment achieved? Well, 2 ways. The first is what you do. You want to provide the right kind of information and enough information so that candidates can make informed decisions about not only whether your organization is right for them in terms of the opportunity that you offer, but also that its culture and values will be a place that they feel comfortable and can excel in. Secondly, of course, you want to be sure that the behaviors of every one of your representatives, whether they are the recruiter, the hiring manager, or just the people that they come into contact with in the hallways during their interviews, all of these people reflect the values and the culture you've stated in your e-brand statement. So what you do first is very important. The second, however, is how you do it. And this is idiosyncratic to each organization. Best practices can be done in many different ways. So the way you implement these best practices should reflect your brand attributes, what you've said about your organization. They should reinforce the values and culture of your brand statement. Let me give you an example. Starbucks has the e-brand statement that you see on the screen. It has 3 important components. The first is an introductory statement that really captures the imagination of someone who's looking for a place where they can excel. Our success depends on your success. That leads into a signature statement, a defining attribute that sets the culture, the values, the experience of working at Starbucks apart from every other organization out there. Our ability to accomplish what we set out to do is based primarily on the people we hire. Here comes the signature statement. We call each other partners. And then the final aspect of their brand statement provides proof. We provide opportunities to develop your skills, further your career, and achieve your goals. That's how we implement our partnership. So that's the claim that Starbucks makes to prospective employees thinking about going to work for Starbucks. How do they optimize the candidate experience? By aligning this statement with what happens in their recruiting process. So let's take a look at that. Remember, touch point number 10, interviews. Anytime a person comes into Starbucks to compete for a position above the store level, they're invited into an interview at the corporate headquarters. This interview unfolds the way all other interviews do, with one unique exception. At the end of the interview, the candidate is asked to sit down with the hiring manager and collegially go through a coffee bean taste testing exercise. In other words, the whole idea of partnership is illustrated in the interview by having the hiring manager and the candidate work together as colleagues, as co-workers, trying to determine which coffee bean would taste the best for Starbucks customers. They actually represent, illustrate the brand attribute of partnership in the interviewing process at touch point number 10. And then at touch point number 16, reinforcement, they also reinforce that sense of partnership. When the person gets back home, the hiring manager, not the recruiter, not the HR department, the hiring manager sends a handwritten message, not an email message, an old-fashioned handwritten message to the individual saying, thanks for coming in to interview at Starbucks, and encloses a couple of gift cards to the local Starbucks store. So what have they done? They have extended the sense of partnership not only to the individual, but to his or her family as well, making sure that the claim that Starbucks has made about being a partnership is as real for the people in the candidate's family as it is for the candidate, him or herself. So that concludes our mini seminar on a brand that walks the talk, optimizing the candidate experience in the war for talent. It's key that we do all of the right things well, but it's also important that we make sure we understand that our success depends upon how we treat those candidates, how the experience that we give them as they go through our recruiting process. And the best way to optimize that experience is to make sure that your brand walks the talk. If you'd like to know more about best practices in online recruiting and how you can tailor them to your employment brand, please consider registering for my free online newsletter that talks about recruiting best practices, or take a look at some of our publications, our training opportunities and consulting that we do at my company. We'd very much like to work with you. Thanks very much. My name is Peter Weddle.